I want to tell you, the media's having a tough time with this one because is this the brown faces of white supremacy or the white face of brown supremacy? We don't really know which one they're going to come up with today. We'll throw them for a loop right here. But I'm with these patriots and I'm proud to have their support because, you know what? We don't need more people just reciting talking points and slogans. We have plenty of people who do that. But the patriots who actually stand up on the hard issues. Speak the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it is hard. You see, that's what this campaign is about. One of the things that I've noticed that's happened over the course of this campaign is many of the positions that I adopted, at the time that I adopted them, were actually unpopular. Think about my position on Ukraine. I was the first person to offer a clear plan for how we're going to put an end to that war through diplomatic resolution. I was a pariah in the Republican Party for much of the earlier part of this year, or last year, for saying so. Even at the first debate, which was by August, from Mike Pence to Nikki Haley to Tim Scott to Chris Christie, rest in peace for his candidacy. but regardless, that was outside of what you call the Overton window, the acceptable bounds of what you could say in the Republican Party. Now the cows are coming home, actually. They understand that's actually what we stand for. When I gave a speech, several of you were possibly there. It was not far from here, where I first said that every high school senior should have to pass the same civics test as every immigrant to this country in order to fully get their rights of citizenship to vote. That was deemed to be unthinkable in this party even, let alone in the mainstream media. That's now, I think, over the course of this, I believe that many Iowans, if not most Iowans, have come around to agreeing with that position. That's why I respect the likes of Candace, her lifting the veil on the corruption of the COVID vaccine and the information that was suppressed. Steve King on so many issues in actually being probably, I think, the best congressman this state has had in a very long time and standing up for what's true now against the CO2 pipeline. Those are the kinds of people we want and need in our movement. There's a reason why I'm the only candidate here in this race who can tell you certain things. That I'll strip pharma companies of the special protections they have from being sued for vaccine injury. That's crony capitalism, and we're going to strip it back and put an end to it and repeal that. The only candidate who can tell you that I am against the CO2 pipeline, making its way across half this state, using eminent domain unconstitutionally in the name of a climate change agenda that, I will say it, is a hoax because it has nothing to do with the climate. The only person in this race who can by name tell you that Ronna McDaniel needs to step aside as the failed chairwoman of the RNC after 5 failed years of leadership because it's the right thing to do for our own party. How can we bring accountability to government if we don't start in our own party? I'm the only person who can tell you that on day 1 in office, I will pardon every peaceful January 6th protester because it's the right thing to do for this country. And I want you to ask why I'm the only candidate who can actually say these things to you. It's because our politics has become corrupted. Anymore, every politician is just dancing to the tune of their biggest donor. And in my case, my biggest donor is me. I don't report to them. I report to you, the people of this country, the United States of America. I'd rather lose this election and speak the truth than to play some fake game of political snakes and ladders. But I'm betting, and the bet we're making on Monday is that that's going to be the winning strategy. That's not up to me. That's up to you. If there's 2 things you get with me, I'm leading our America First movement to the next level, but what does that mean? There's 2 things that means. First is a very simple idea that our founding fathers had 250 years ago. That we, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. That is not the case today. Today it's the cancerous deep state, the 3-letter agencies that are pulling the strings of power right now. I'm going to put an end to that deep state, to gut that deep state. You actually want to get serious about draining the swamp. Here's how we're actually going to do it this time. On day 1, I will fire 75% of federal bureaucrats across the board. This is how you drain the swamp. We're not messing around this time. For government agencies like the FBI, the ATF, the CDC, the U.S. Department of Education, we're not reforming them. We're going to get in there and shut them down. That's how you revive this constitutional republic. You don't start with last year's budget as the baseline, which is based on the prior year's budget before that, which is based on the year before's budget, all of which is broken, all of which is corrupt. That's how you get a $34 trillion national debt problem. We will start with zero as our baseline and ask what's actually necessary. Zero-based budgeting, that's how I've run my businesses. That's how I'm going to run the federal government in the United States of America. If I can't work for you for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, by the way. We like that term limit. Neither should any of those federal bureaucrats reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of civil service protections. This is how you drain the swamp. It's not complicated. It's common sense that the people we elect to run the government should be the ones who actually run the government. That's number one. And number two is that the moral duty that they owe, that I will owe as your next president, is to the citizens of this country, not another one. Not going to fork over $200 billion of our own taxpayer money. We're cutting Social Security here. We're putting an end to veterans benefits here to fork over $200 billion more so some Ukrainian kleptocrat can buy a bigger house. No. We're going to use our own military to protect our own borders in this country. On day one, I will move our troops to our southern border and our northern border too. That's what it means to protect our homeland and stand for the rule of law. I'll end birthright citizenship for the kids of illegal migrants. It does not apply to them in this country. That's what the Constitution says. I will stop using federal funding, our money, to fund sanctuary cities, to fork over more money to those illegal migrants in our own country. And yes, anybody who is in this country illegally will be returned to their country of origin, and we will use not only ICE agents, but using existing law, the power that local law enforcement has to actually make that slogan a reality. This isn't too much to ask. The people we elect to run the government should run the government, and they owe a moral duty to the citizens of this nation, not another one. The fact that that's now presented to you all by the mainstream media as a radical candidate, as an extremist, as somebody who is frightening, dangerous, what Van Jones, some character on CNN, says he is shaking when he hears ideas like this one, tells you how far we've come as a country. These aren't black ideas or white ideas. These aren't even really Democrat ideas or Republican ideas. They shouldn't be. These are American ideals that we fought a revolution in 1776 to secure. And I think we live in a 1776 moment right now. We've become a nation of sheep. What would our founding fathers, what would Thomas Jefferson say if he were here right now, the guy who signed that Declaration of Independence at the age of 33? He'd say you're in a 1776 moment. You still have another 250 years still left yet to go if you can step up and actually seize it for yourself. But you cannot inherit it passively. We didn't do it the first time around. You all can't do it now. It is up to us to step up and actually do our part, to say in public what you will say in private at the dinner table, to say it with a spine, say it with conviction. That's how we get this country back. And I need you to start by doing that, and I'm here to ask you for your help in doing it on January 15th, on Monday night. It's going to be cold. I'm telling you, I'm warning you right now. It's going to be real, not like a little cold. It's going to be real cold. But George Washington did not complain about the weather when he crossed the Delaware, okay? And I do think that that's the kind of moment we live in now. We are in the middle of a war for the existence of our country. It is not between black and white, as the media would teach you to believe. It's not even between Democrat and Republican, not in the traditional sense. It is between those of us who love the United States of America and our founding ideals, those of us who believe that all men are created equal, those of us who believe in free speech and open debate, those of us who believe in merit, and a fringe minority on the other side who hates our country and what we stand for. And I call this a war because there is no middle ground here. Either you believe in merit or you believe in group quotas. You cannot have both. Either you believe in free speech or you believe in censorship. You cannot have both. Either you believe in American exceptionalism or you believe in apologizing for who we are. You cannot have both. And right now, more than ever, we need a commander-in-chief who will lead us to victory in this war. You got to know you're in a war to win one. A commander-in-chief who can't be bought and paid for by the special interests. And I think now more than ever, a commander-in-chief with fresh legs to reach and lead the next generation of Americans back to our founding ideals. And I'll say this in the spirit of speaking hard truths. What I see right now, and this is important in the next few days leading to January 15th, I see us being led into a trap. That's what I think is happening. And it pains me to watch it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's only two America First candidates in this race. That's Donald Trump and myself. And I respect the heck out of him. I've stood up at every step against these persecutions today, right now. I announced it today. Announced it actually last night that I was going to, but it's happening as we speak. My legal team is filing right now as we speak an amicus brief with the Supreme Court laying out the legal argument for why they need to overturn that disastrous Colorado decision to keep Donald J. Trump off the ballot. Same thing in Maine. I've said every Republican needs to take themselves off the ballot because that's how we stop election interference in our own primaries, nullify any state that behaves illegally. I've stood up against these disastrous prosecutions. But if you think at this point that they are going to let Donald Trump get anywhere near that White House again, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. These people have now made clear they will stop at nothing, and I mean nothing, to keep this man away from power. And we cannot fall into that trap. They want this to be a two-horse race, eliminate Trump, and trot in their puppet into the White House. I used to think it was someone in the Democratic Party. Turns out it's right here in our own Republican Party. It's going to happen in the spring. Two-horse race, eliminate Trump, trot in somebody who wants to tie your social media accounts to your government-issued IDs and fork over more money to foreign wars that keep paying the war machine that make money off of it. That's exactly what they're planning to do. Do not fall for their trick. We cannot fall into that trap because our America First movement, it didn't begin in 2016. It began in 1776, and we owe it to our founding fathers and to this country to make sure it doesn't end with us now, that we have another 250 years left. So even for those of you who are weighing what choice to make, and I get it. If I wasn't in this race, I'd be voting for Donald Trump. I'm asking you to do something maybe a little different than what you might have been thinking 3 or 6 months ago for the sake of this country. To open your eyes to what's happening. We love the man because he got this fight started. Now it is our job, my job, to finish it. And if you all do your part, I will do mine. Our family and I, we will stop at nothing to do ours, to make sure, not in some cheesy politician way, but in a true way, to make sure that our country's best days are actually still ahead of us. Thank you for coming today, guys. God bless you and your families and our United States of America. I want to, Candace, hand it over to you maybe to say a few words as well.
Hi, guys. Very nice to see you. I'm very excited to be in Iowa. Thank you for the warm welcome. If there's anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Candace Owens. I've been in the political realm, I guess, for about 7 years. I'm a podcaster. I host my own daily show, as well as an author. But the most important title and job that I have is as a mother, which is why, thank you, without question, which is why I'm here. And it sounds crazy and a bit paradoxical, but I had a baby 7 weeks ago, so I'm like just wanting to grab your baby back there. But what could make a mother leave their infant 7 weeks after? And, you know, I want to answer that question. You know, when Vivek called me, things are crazy, I'm postpartum, and I'm thinking, how am I going to get up there? And then I realized how important it was for me to get up there to articulate to everyone why it is that I'm standing next to Vivek. I think especially as parents, and all across America in general, even if you're not a parent, the doom that I felt following the last election, that dread that we all sensed following the last election, it's hard to put into words. I think, especially on the heels of COVID and really understanding the claw of the administrative state, understanding that it didn't really matter who we elected because we had these bureaucrats that were making decisions telling us that we were selfish and wrong if we wanted to go to work and earn a living. At the same time, they flip a coin and tell us that we've got to, fund wars that are overseas, constantly being beaten and told that America first is wrong, that you are a backwards person if you care about your children, if you care about being able to feed your children and your family. And so I felt that doom, I felt that gloom, and on my podcast, I even think that energy was coming across. I was lucky enough, Vivek announced that he was running. I didn't really think much of the campaign. I was like, I don't really know that much about him. I've had him on my show a couple of times. And what I can tell you is that after he spoke to me for about 35 to 40 minutes on the podcast, I have about 7 people that work in the control room, and all of us were just blown away. And what we were blown away by was how positive we felt after he spoke to us. I realized how toxic politics had become. And for the first time, we had a candidate that made me feel hopeful that we might get my grandfather's America back. My grandfather's America being the recognition that the thing that unites us, it's not race, it's not religion, it's the American dream. It's this understanding that no matter who you are, no matter where you start in life, that if you work hard and you stay out of trouble and you make good decisions, this country can and will reward you. And that's been slipping. That dream has been feeling like it's fading. And when I spoke to Vivek, I realized that he made me feel hope again, that hope that I want my children to feel, that they could grow up in the same America that my grandfather grew up in, where you could make something of yourself. And so it became increasingly important for me to use my platform to get people familiar with Vivek. Obviously, my platform means nothing compared to what he's done since he's been on my podcast. Now he's everywhere. And to really recognize when he hit that first Republican debate stage, that they all turned their guns, figurative guns, onto him, that should tell you who you should be supporting. Because these other candidates, I've seen it, and it made me quite cynical over the years. As soon as a little bit of money gets involved, they say what they're supposed to say. As soon as their donors tell them what they're supposed to support, they support it. I mean, people that I even felt hopeful about. I didn't have anything personally against DeSantis when he got into the race. And then I would see him sort of wish-washy on things, and I knew his donors and what they supported and understood that suddenly that mattered. Vivek is his own biggest donor. That gives him a freedom that we need, freedom to continue to support the American people. We all know what's happening in Washington, D.C. We all understand what we mean when we say that there is a swamp that needs to be drained. I don't think we understood the severity of it until this last election. I am hopeful that just me articulating this to you as a parent, not as a podcaster, but as a mom, that come Monday, you will brave the cold. You will take 10 to 15, no, 20 challenge yourself people with you, and make Vivek the next president of the United States. He's at the beginning of his career in politics, and I'm here to support it.
And doing away with the Department of Education,
Yes.
and I totally agree with that. And then you've talked about putting armed
Security
people
guards.
in schools, which I don't think is outrageous. I homeschooled my kids. But is that a federal program, or would that be local?
It's a great
state?
point. It's a great point. So I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in the 10th Amendment. That which is not reserved to the federal government is reserved respectively to the states and to the people. One of the main complaints at the state level is that they don't have sufficient federal funding to put 3 armed security guards in schools. So I have a solution for them. The $80 billion we're spending, it's also the state's general objection to school choice programs. Oh, they'd be underfunded. The answer to both of those in one fell swoop. The 3 armed security guards is a tiny fraction of the total. $80 billion at the Department of Education. Shut it down. Return that money to the states and to the people. And it's up to states as a hook for getting it. They have to have school choice available in their states. Otherwise, they couldn't disperse it. That's effectively how we ensure that the states, for each state, school choice programs work in different ways. That's up to each state to decide. But that's the extent of the federal involvement. And then that funds the underfunding budget. And the way you could think about this is the way that Reagan set a national drinking age wasn't from the federal government directly. It was by tying state highway funds to the actual adoption of a basic minimal standard that runs across our country so it will be for our schools as well. So each state will adopt it, but that's a condition for getting the $80 billion that goes back. Great question, sir. I love the specificity, too. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to the back corner, then we'll bring it up to the front.
As I'm sure there are a lot of veterans in here, and what we see going on in the military now since the evacuation of Afghanistan and everything, it's absolutely embarrassing.
Yep.
Okay, and particularly what just happened with Lloyd Austin. So,
Yes.
but you running for president, what would you do to address those issues specifically, and then what qualifies you to be commander-in-chief?
Thank you. So I'll answer the first question first. The best way to stand for those who serve this country is to make sure that when they serve this country, they're advancing the interests of this country and not another one. And we failed on that count for the last 25 years. Wars that haven't necessarily advanced the American interest. I'm worried that we're about to make those same mistakes in places like Ukraine. And even the mismanagement of the Afghanistan exit was the utter sign of disrespect for the American men and women who did serve in the first phase of that mission that was necessary. Why did you have to leave from the civilian airport rather than the military airport? It just doesn't make any sense. Why would you remove all of our troops and then take the civilians last? Why would you do this in the peak of what the Taliban calls, their words, not mine, fighting season when the weather is good, rather than when it was initially planned for, which was during the cold season when the Taliban has actually retreated? It's almost, at a certain level, you think it's just negligence upon negligence, but at a certain point, you start to begin to believe that it's almost even intentional, that the corruption and the rot runs that deep. You can't believe that those are just coincidentally negligent decisions. We're going to clear house at the Pentagon. We're going to restore the purpose of the U.S. military, to win wars, to avoid wars, and to protect and defend our own citizens here in our own homeland. So the top purpose of where I'm going to use troops isn't stationing them in places like Germany. We got 40,000 troops sitting on a base in Germany. For what? Germany doesn't even spend 2% of its own GDP on military expenditures, and they don't like that any better more than I do, I see, for our kids in the back. And so it's going to have to be to stand for what's right. In many ways, it is for the next generation of Americans. We have a 25% recruitment deficit in our own U.S. military. And don't worry about it in the back. That's the soundtrack in both of our homes. We know that well. The only thing it does, it makes me miss my younger son, who I haven't seen in a little too long. But we're making the sacrifice for a reason. So what I'm going to do as a commander-in-chief is, first of all, I'm going to get our troops out of places that they don't need to be, like Germany. They can pay for their own national defense. They don't even spend 2% of their GDP on military defense expenditures. To the contrary, I'm going to move our own troops to our own southern border and our northern border too, protecting our own homeland. My foreign policy is clear. Avoid World War III. Declare economic independence from communist China. We shouldn't depend on our enemy for our own way of life. A dirty little secret is most of our military equipment is actually made in China. The F-35 jets, the new version, is made in China. Think about that. That's senseless, depending on our enemy for our modern way of life. So I'm going to avoid World War III, declare independence from China, and then use our own national defense spending to actually defend our own homeland in this country. If it was 3 million Chinese coming from the western border, if it was 3 million Iranians coming from the eastern border, we'd call it what it is, an invasion. That is an invasion of millions on our own southern border. And it is shameful that we live in a world where we think it's acceptable to use our military to protect somebody else's border, but not our own. That's what I'm going to put an end to with a commander-in-chief that stands for the citizens of this nation and defending our own homeland. That's the top priority. Standing for veterans is also something we're failing to do. A nation that doesn't stand for its veterans isn't really a nation. Young people aren't stupid. Part of the reason we have that recruitment deficit is they say, this is how you're going to treat our veterans on the back end, why on earth would I serve on the front end? Close to 40 veterans per day committing suicide in this country, America. It's unacceptable. It's un-American. And so I've unveiled comprehensive veterans policy. I'll just give you a couple examples of what's in there. Veterans should have paid 6-week decompression buffers when they come back from war to civilian life, from a combat role to civilian life. That brings down the rate of PTSD by 80%. We need more privacy restrictions so veterans can actually report their PTSD. Many don't because they're afraid of being tagged with the red flag law. They shouldn't have to drive 200 miles to get to the nearest VA. Community-based medical care should be paid for through the VA, then they're actually going to seek the medical care that they're otherwise not getting. I'm a little bit spicy for the Republican Party on this one, but it's the truth, so I'll share it with you. I think we need absolute medical choice for veterans to be able to get psilocybin or ayahuasca or ketamine through the VA system as medical care, much better alternatives than turning to fentanyl or suicide, which is where they're going today. So these are basic changes. I don't think any veterans benefit, and I don't think that any active duty military compensation should be subject to federal taxation either. Doesn't make any sense. And so that's what it means to actually stand for our veterans. Anybody who was kicked out of the military based on refusing to receive a shot in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic should actually be the kind of people we want in our military who think independently and are able to actually make solid decisions for themselves. Every one of them on my watch, and I think I'm the only candidate to say this, will have their positions restored with 1.5 times back pay. That's the right thing to do as the next commander-in-chief, standing for our veterans as well. So thank you, sir. I appreciate the question. We'll come right here to the front.
Yes. Do you have any plans to revise the H-2B visa program?
Yeah, we got to actually take the entire legal immigration apparatus, the H-1B as well. We got to gut that system. It's all based on bureaucracy. Why would you leave to a lottery system what you otherwise could actually use to advance our own interests through actual decision-making of who comes into the country versus not? Why on earth is this only that even the people come, even if you get into this, in the H-1B at least, they're tethered to the very company who sponsors them, but they can't switch to another company. It's the product of Silicon Valley lobbying in this country. So I think the first step, though, has to be to end the illegal mass migration in this country. Before we're talking about legal immigration, this or that, it's got to be ending the invasion at our own southern border and making sure anybody in this country is returned to their country of origin. Only after that can we have then an honest conversation about legal immigration policy, because otherwise they'll keep conflating the two. So we've got to go in order. When it comes to our legal immigration policy, I've got one simple principle. Same principle I use for everything else. What legal immigration policy best advances the interests of the citizens who are already here? Right now, chain-based migration doesn't particularly advance that. I think Steve, they may be having you get us a head start. Sure. I agree with you on that one especially. And Steve, I want to say a thing about Steve. Steve talked about building the wall, the border wall, before it was cool. They called him a racist and a xenophobe for doing it. And yet today, now look how far we've come. Basically, everybody in this country understands that. And so it takes somebody who's ahead of the curve, skates to where the puck is going. And that's why I'm proud to have Steve's endorsement and congratulate him for everything he's done for this country. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. And so anyway, what legal immigration policy at best advances the interests of our citizens? That means less chain-based migration. That's to say, just because somebody's a family member of a different generation, aunt or whatever. No, that doesn't automatically get you in. What gets you in is, are you going to make contributions to this country, and are you going to pledge allegiance to this country? And I think that should be the sole basis. Asylum-based immigration needs to come down dramatically. We need to restore sensible immigration policy. And are there immigrants? I mean, I'm a kid of legal immigrants. I believe that actually there is a role for people to add value to this country and the citizens of this country to benefit from building a championship team in the United States of America. But let's build a championship team. You want to get Kobe Bryant on your team, that's great. You don't recruit his great aunt to also join you. You don't also give 4 other people asylum from a town where he happened to have grown up. So I think that's the way we have to think about it, is we're building a championship team. That's not what the bureaucracy is doing now. And we can't do this sensibly until we've ended the illegal mass migration problem first. And that's where my attention will be on day one. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the question. We'll go to the back there. Oh, man, you're fast. I love that. Reminds me, I haven't been getting my own cardio in.
Yes, so, sorry, is this too loud? Okay, I'm
It's
good.
good.
So I am a person that works very hard for my money. I pay for undergrad. I pay my way through my master's, working extra shifts. Candace Owens actually changed my mindset. I'm going to keep it at that in terms of there is a such thing as an American dream, regardless of what age you are, where you come from, or anything like that. My parents had absolutely no money. I didn't either, but I made it work. And I think that, with the master's and where I work, it's paying off. And so I'm trying to teach people, and I hate to make it about race, but I'm trying to teach people that look like me, it can work if we think independently,
Yes.
if we listen to Candace Owens and Vivek, and things
Thank
like
you.
that. But my question to you is how hard I work with all of the jobs I do have. Last month, they had an inflation of 3.4%. So right now with the administration, I do not believe that my money is going anywhere that's helpful. So my question to you is how can you help decrease that, and or what are your thoughts in terms of inflation and
Sure.
how many people you have working very hard towards this American dream?
Thank you. Great question, and I'm proud of you. Only thing I'd ask of you is keep sharing your story with people. If I don't mind me asking, how old are you? 26. No, come on. So I think it's the reason I asked that is I think it's really important that you share that with people in your generation who I think have wallowed in this myth of victimhood. We have a nation of victims right now. We used to be a nation of victors. We've become a nation of victims. It's what we reward in this country, actually. We've created a new victimhood culture. We wield it like a currency. And people like you, people like Candace, people like my own parents who came to this country legally and raised my brother and I the way we raise our kids, is to say you do get ahead with your own hard work and commitment without apologizing for it. Are you going to encounter hardship? Yes, it is. Yes, you will. It's life. But hardship is not the same thing as victimhood. Now, it's up to us now to still take it into our power to put a leader in charge that can actually address some of the ways in which the government has created obstacles for hardworking Americans like you. Ending inflation, this is actually doable. Increase the supply of everything. Fill in the blank. Increase the supply of energy. Drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear energy. Brings down the cost of energy, grows this economy. That's how you fight inflation and grow the economy. You're going to fight the national debt while we're at it. Get the oil and gas out from underneath our ground and sell it. That buys down $8 trillion of our national debt. Instantly, our national debt problem is already closer to being under control. That's number one. Increase the supply of housing. How do you do that? What's the constraint on housing? A lot of regulations like land use restrictions that are now stopping new construction of homes if they're smaller homes. Minimums for large plots. That's the product of lobbying at a point where BlackRock and even China are buying up a lot of the land in this country, bidding that up. Those land use restrictions do not serve the people in this country. It's made housing less affordable. Strip those back, increase the supply of housing, bring down the cost, grow the economy. Another one here, many small business owners face a real challenge right now of filling their open positions. The top obstacle to growing a small business. Stop using our taxpayer money to pay people more to stay at home instead of people like you to go to work. That's how we get the economy back, increase the supply of labor, bring down overall costs in the supply chain, and grow this economy. And by the way, on that one, address part of the mental health epidemic while we're at it too. I mean, literally, I'm not making this up. Our generation is among them that is collecting more money from our parents for sustenance than any other generation in the past. That's actually responsible for driving depression and anxiety. You think just because you're getting a small check from the government in the form of aid, sitting in your parents' basement smoking pot, playing video games, you think that's going to give you purpose and meaning? It doesn't. And so that's why I think our economic challenges, but also our psychological challenges as a country, our loss of purpose, these things are deeply connected. We live in a moment where the things that used to fill that void in our heart, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. And that leaves a black hole, a moral vacuum in our hearts. And when you have that vacuum that runs that deep, that is when the poison fills the void. Pick your favorite one. We almost obsess over them individually too much. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, Zelenskyism. I mean, I think there's an element of that, actually. Hunger for purpose, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. It's not a coincidence that we see the rise of these same poisons at the same time. There's symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning. And I do think that supporting Americans to live that American dream by no longer paying people to do the opposite of what's best for them. More money not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house. More money not to go to work than to go to work. More money not to repay your student loans than to repay your student loans as you did through your hard work. That's what it's going to take for the government to play its part. But it's also going to be everybody else playing theirs too. I'm not going to be the leader of this movement who tells you it's just going to be about me, coming from on high like a Messiah from the White House to save us. It doesn't work that way. I'm in this to play my part. That's what you need in a president. Shut down the deep state. Get done what needs to be done in protecting our own nation's borders. Stripping back the bad policies that are holding back our economy. But if we are going to be saved, it's going to be because we save ourselves. It is going to take pastors and parents and entrepreneurs and workers and teachers across this country to each play their part as well. And so that's why I'm asking every one of us to play our part, even after you make me your president, if you do. I'm not letting you off the hook that easily. Every one of us has our role to play. And so I come back to saying, it's the first thing I told you, what I want you to ask you to do is share your own story with people your age. Teach them not to be victims, but to be victorious. And to say that, you know what, you can be an example of getting ahead through hard work, and it's my job to make sure it's true when you actually say it, rather than an American myth, which is what it's increasingly becoming. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. We have time for maybe one or two more questions we could take before we wrap. We'll go right there, and then we'll give you the final word, ma'am.
I appreciate you coming out here today. I've been following you for a long time. I'm from Illinois. I unfortunately won't be able to circle your name on Monday.
Thank you for coming, though,
but I
sir.
want
I
you
appreciate
all
it.
to go circle your name on Monday because I want to vote for you in the presidential candidate. So thank you so much for what you're doing. I appreciate your energy. One question is, how do you plan to maintain this energy over the next 8 years?
You know, I find that Candace asked me, what do you drink coffee? I don't do caffeine. I think that my wife has correctly identified that that's not a good mix. I'm at my best, and I have no limit for my energy if I'm guided by a sense of purpose. Right? We're in this for a reason. It's my faith, actually, that teaches me, and I'm Hindu. Many of you know this. A little different than the traditional background of people who run for U.S. president. Thomas Jefferson, actually, people don't know this about him. He was actually a deist. He was not a traditional Christian, actually. But regardless, my faith teaches me that God puts each of us here for a purpose. There's one true God, and he puts us here for a reason. It's not being done by us. It is being done through us. That's what I believe. And in my life, whenever I'm called by that actual sense of purpose, sometimes it feels like you wake up, you're going through the aimless passage of time, doing what your iPhones tell us to do on a given day. That's what the country looks like at times to me, but that's not this country. And where I get my energy is out of my sense of conviction for why we're in this. 4 days ago, we had the snowstorm in the Northwest. I was the only candidate that did multiple campaign events that day. Had a 6-hour, ended up being 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever it was, back to Des Moines. We got back at 3 a.m., 6:30 a.m. that we started the next morning, did 4 events across the southeast of this state. We will stop at nothing in the way we lead this country. It's how I've built my businesses. My parents, I'm grateful to them for instilling in me many of the values that we hope to instill in our kids. My dad had a lot of sayings that have now stuck with me. They used to think they were corny when you were a teenager. Now, as a dad, you say, actually, made some pretty good sense. I grew up in Southwest Ohio as the kid of immigrants to this country. You stand out in some ways. My dad said, if you're going to stand out, you might as well be outstanding. That was one of the expressions he taught us. Another thing he said, if people tell you good luck, how do you spell luck? W-O-R-K. And it's worked for me. And I think it works in our country as well. And so I get my energy from my family, from our sense of purpose, and the same energy we've put into this campaign. That's exactly how we're going to lead this country. And that's what this country deserves. Not somebody who, Joe Biden, I mean, you could call it elder abuse, you could call it whatever it is. I think we need a president who stands for conviction and can reach and lead the new generation. And I think I'm going to be able to do that in a way that nobody else in this race can. Thank you, man. I appreciate that question.
Yeah. I just I've heard some disturbing things about your stance on inheritance taxes. And I want to make sure that you clarify that because that is something that is
absolutely
very personal to me. My parents have worked very hard for their money. And one of the things as a professor I tell my students all the time, look, the inheritance tax, from my perspective, the students and the kids did earn some of that because the parents were out doing their thing, and so they were sacrificing time with their parents and others. So I would like
Don't we know it?
Yeah, exactly, as you are both doing. I would like you to clarify that for me.
Yeah,
please.
absolutely. And so I want to use this as an example, because I actually got a question at my last event about this too. This is the Super PAC puppet masters. I mean, it's a corrupt political game. It's not even the campaigns. The amount the super PACs have spent on effectively spreading purposeful, misleading snippets is actually everything that's wrong with our politics today. But I'm not going to sit here and gripe about that. I'm going to answer your question. So I've written 3 books. One of them is Woke Inc., one of them is Nation of Victims, and the third one is Capitalist Punishment. I told you I mentioned here, Thomas Jefferson is my favorite president. One of the reasons I respect him is he was actually a true intellectual. He could explore ideas that were different than his own, but you got to understand them deeply. The way I tell it to young people is, you see a new set of ideas, let's say I'm showing up on a college campus, I'll say, try it on like a set of clothes. If it doesn't fit, you can put it back on the rack, but you got to be able to try it on. And my 11th grade English teacher, Linda Smith, she always taught me, if you can't offer the best argument for the other side, then you don't know what you actually believe yourself, okay? So anyway, in Nation of Victims, I go through a lot. In Woke Inc., I explored the idea of, would mandated civic service for the country make sense? I like the spirit of it, but it does not apply in the United States of America. You should never mandate it. So the idea, the sort of a similar idea around how do we revive that sense of civic duty and civic equality that we explored the contours of in Nation of Victims was for kids who I went to school with, many of whom suffered at places like Harvard and Yale from depression. They grew up in billionaires' families because they know that they stand to inherit $1 billion+. They actually lost their own sense of purpose. Whereas for me, the ultimate privilege that I had was not growing up in money, actually, but was growing up in a household with 2 parents in a stable family environment, instilling in us a belief in education and a belief in God. So in that context, I say, hey, look, a lot of these people, what if we actually imagined a world in which you could eliminate the income tax? Just make the income tax 0, and anybody, no matter how hard they work, can become that billionaire on their own as fast as possible. What would the inheritance tax rate have to be in order to eliminate the income tax altogether? In the same way that Thomas Jefferson, one reason I admire him, I got to be able to explore those ideas. And the number ends up being, the math works out like 59% or something like that. It's completely unimplementable, and I said so in the book as well. I don't know if you've read my book or any of them. It's fine. I'm not here to sell books, I promise. But that's where I was part of my exploration. I've also been very clear about my tax policy, which is probably what the super PACs didn't tell you. I'm the only candidate that's offered one. 12% flat tax across the board. Capital gain, ordinary income, corporate tax across the board. Make permanent what expires in 2 years, the inheritance tax exemption. Right now, up to the first $11 million, you're exempt from inheritance tax at all. That expires in about 2 years. I believe we need to make that permanent. And the rate above that right now is 40%. As I've told you, I favor a 12% flat tax across the board and then eliminate the cronyist deductions that companies have lobbied for. So that's my tax plan as your U.S. president. That's what grows the economy. But I'm not a guy who reads the talking points from the political slogans. I promise you, no political consultant vetted the things in my books. I mean, not just that one. I got a question about the mandated civic service exploration in Woke Inc. I'm not in favor of that. I favor 12th graders having to pass a civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a voting citizen of this country. That's the policy I actually stand for. But the books I've written, they're not candidate books. Candidate books are boring. They're usually scripted and written by the consultants and signed by the candidate. It was actually a product where if you want to actually maybe get to know me, if you read those 3 books, one of the things you'll realize is there were things in the second one that I called out in my first one where I actually agree with about 95% of what's in the first book. I agree with about maybe 98% of what's in the second book, and my third one came out this year. I think we want a president who can actually think and explore those ideas, even if it is vulnerable to exploitation by super PACs. But it's not going to stop me from continuing to lead this country in the same way. Thank you for that question. And please spread the message for whoever else might have confusion on that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, good. One final question if anybody has the final word. Sir? Yes. Interesting how that works, is China in particular. So just by way of people's understanding of, just by show of hands, anybody understand what the World Economic Forum is or the ESG agenda? About half of you. Without using mumbo jumbo, there's basically a transnational movement, okay, that transcends national boundaries, that wants to dissolve the boundaries between the public sector and the private sector, between companies and the government, dissolve the boundaries between nations, and eventually dissolve the boundaries between the online world and the offline world. That's what the metaverse is about. to advance what they consider to be the global common good. What is this? It's actually the old world European view. If you think about this, for most of human history, when people understand the World Economic Forum, one thing to understand about this, before getting worked up about it, it's a big problem, but sometimes when you're angry, you miss the essence of what's happening. So before even getting angry, let's just understand the view. What they believe is that the people cannot be trusted to self-govern. That it's in the best interest of the people themselves to say that you have the ability to speak your mind freely as long as I get to in return. That's a crazy idea because you might say the wrong thing and mislead some people. Oh, we the people settle at the ballot box what our climate change policies should be? No, because the planet would cease to exist if we allowed the people to make that decision. For most of human history, that's how it's been done, actually. That's the thing to understand. In old world Europe, the idea that you get to speak your mind openly, that's a radical idea. The idea that we settle our differences at the ballot box, that's a crazy idea. But that's what we fought a revolution to secure in this country in 1776, to say that, yes, we the people do create a government that is accountable to us instead of the other way around. And the World Economic Forum now represents rearing that old monster's head yet again, using our own money, including our retirement funds or otherwise, to vote for policies in corporate America's boardrooms that most of us certainly disagree with, and which don't advance our best financial interests. Fighting climate change in the name of a carbon capture pipeline, what Steve King talked about, that's part of the World Economic Forum's agenda. To be able to use our taxpayer dollars, use eminent domain across your land. And mark my words, if they can use eminent domain across your land to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for a pipeline, next up is your gas stove, your combustion engine vehicle, your car, for that matter, your cow, because all of them emit methane or carbon dioxide as well, and they'll leave a $50 check in your mailbox. So what can be done about it? Well, first of all, we have to stop using our taxpayer money to fund institutions like the WHO or the WEF, or for that matter, the UN, that are hostile to our own sovereignty in the United States of America. So I'll put an end to that funding. And then rescind all of the pro-ESG rules that have been woven in to our administrative state and our Department of Labor and otherwise. They're unconstitutional, and I'll put an end to it. I've been trying to do this as an entrepreneur. After I wrote that second book, I actually started a company called Strive, an asset manager that competes directly against BlackRock, whose CEO Larry Fink is on the board of the World Economic Forum. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, offering alternative investment products. Those guys use your money to vote for toxic climate and racial policies in corporate America. My firm started a firm that says, you know what, we're voting for actually what maximizes profit and makes you more successful at delivering your products, solely maximizing value. Crossed $1 billion in assets under management after we launched the first fund, twice as fast as it took JP Morgan to get to the same place. So my whole career has been built on taking on bureaucracies and winning. That's what I've done. Take on the bureaucracy of Big Pharma, started a biotech company that developed medicines that Big Pharma left behind, did it faster, called their bluff. That's why they don't appreciate me very much. Same thing with respect to the ESG movement, leading anti-ESG asset managers. I've taken on those bureaucracies as an entrepreneur. But all roads lead back to the mother of all bureaucracies. And that's the one in the federal government, the deep state, the permanent state, that's working with transnational actors to get done through the back door what they couldn't through the front door. And that's why I'm in this race. That's why I'm in this, to make the sacrifices we need to lead this country. Shut down that permanent state. The rest of it automatically follows. And so if you all do your part to help get us there, that choice doesn't belong to me, it belongs to you. But if you all do your part, I promise you, my family and I, we're going to stop at nothing to do ours. To make sure we're not anymore this nation in decline. We're taught to believe we're at the end of the ancient Roman Empire, that all we have left is to fight over the scraps of some shrinking pie. We don't have to be that nation in decline. If George Washington were here today, what would he say? I think if he were in this room right now, he would say, you don't have to be this nation in decline. I think our nation is still a little young, actually. Going through our own version of adolescence. Figuring out who we're going to be when we grow up. And when you view it that way, it makes sense again, actually. You go through your adolescence, you go through that identity crisis. You do some stupid things. Most of us probably did. But we are stronger for it when we get to our adulthood on the other side. So no, I don't think we have to be that nation in decline. I think we still can be a nation in our ascent. Maybe even the early stages of our ascent, actually. Maybe we're not even at base camp. On our way still to that country where we will look our kids in the eye and tell them and mean it. When we say that in the United States of America, you do get ahead with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what? You are free to speak your minds at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And that is what we are going to revive to save this great country. Thank you guys for coming today.